Welcome, you're listening to Digging Star Wars, your online journal of the films that inspired George Lucas to create the Star Wars saga.
Hello and welcome into this episode, the final episode of Season 3 of Digging Star Wars, The Godfather. And today, obviously, we're going to talk about Coppola's masterpiece and its connection to Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. I'm very pleased to announce our guest, Matt Flesher, who is a longtime friend of mine. Matt's bio goes a little something like this. He's a self-taught sculptor with 19 years of experience in the special effects, stop-motion animation, and toy industries. He has worked for numerous studios and companies such as Jim Henson Studios, Will Vinton Studios, McFarlane Toys, and Hasbro. That's McFarlane, right? I'm pronouncing that correct?
McFarlane, yeah.
McFarlane Toys, and Hasbro, and has helped bring to life productions such as Independence Day, Batman Forever, George of the Jungle, and, of course, Dr. Dolittle. Can't forget that. Matt has also taught animation, sculpture, and Photoshop to students from 8 to 80 years old, and has an NYS teaching certificate in art education. He is currently a full-time project sculptor for Fisher-Price, residing in Western New York with his wife Allison and his 2-year-old daughter Coraline. Matt, how are you?
I'm great.
Thank you so much for doing this. Was it weird watching The Godfather after all these years?
It was. And I got to be honest, I've only seen The Godfather a handful of times. I know it's, as a ex-film student, that's kind of sacrilege, but this is only one of a handful of times I've actually ever even watched the movie.
For those of you who don't know Matt, because I know some of our listeners do, some of our listeners probably don't, Matt and I went to University of the Arts together. We both were film majors. You were actually a film animation major, correct? You were a double major.
Yes.
Yeah. And back then he went by Chief, so a lot of our friends know Matt as by his nickname Chief. Matt and I worked on each other's film productions. He did a lot of really cool special effects films. He did special effects on my thesis film, The Road Taken, which required a lot of fake blood and broken glass.
Yes.
It was really cool, and the funny thing was, when I'm laying out the episodes and the films that I'm going to do on Digging Star Wars, guests are sometimes just a happy accident. It's like it's who's available or a perfect match. And I don't know, for some reason, I knew I wanted you to do Godfather when I wrote out the Season 3 list. And I didn't really think about why. I know that, there's videos where, like, we would goof on, like, one of us being Lucas and one of us being Coppola and all that. But, you know what I'm talking about, right?
I know it's coming.
Thanks for Chiefala and all that business. But there was a moment of clarity the other day when I was thinking about why I wanted to do this movie. And The Godfather is one of the few non-Star Wars films referenced in the official Star Wars Trivial Pursuit board game. And when my wife and I were out visiting Matt back when he lived in Los Angeles in August of 1998, one of those nights, I remember while we were in LA, you ran out to the store and bought Star Wars Trivial Pursuit. And came back, and we played to the wee hours in the morning and all that. And I realized, I know The Godfather is one of those answers, or one of those questions. I had to run down and, get the card, and I felt like that must have been my brain saying, you gotta get Chief. You gotta get Matt Fletcher to do. So I thought it was funny how that kind
of... Good memory.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's like, but it took a long time for my brain to put all those points together, to connect all the dots. And I think that's just why it kind of made sense in my head to do it. So, talk a little bit about yourself. So you've worked on films. Like, what did you do on the films you mentioned? Like, what did you do on Independence Day and Batman Forever?
Well, when I was working in the movie industry, I was starting to sculpt a lot of my own, but for work, I was doing a lot of mold making of other people's sculptures.
Okay.
And so I was sculpting on the side, trying to get into a sculpture position within these shops I was working in, but I was pretty good at mold making, and so I kind of got pigeonholed in that kind of thing. So I was working on the Creature Crew on Independence Day, so I made molds of all the aliens and cast up copies of them in various materials, silicones and latex, and for different purposes and different uses and different scales. We had full-size suits, we had quarter-scale models, we had all kinds of stuff. So I was molding and casting stuff, and that's what I did for a large part of the time I did special effects. I did do a little bit of sculpting in the special effects area, but
and is that what you did on Batman and Forever?
Yeah, that was on Batman Forever. I worked on some of the costume pieces for Batman's costume. We did chest emblems and utility belts and spikes for his gloves.
Wow. Now, how many people, for a prop like that, with just the glove alone, is that all you, or are you working with a team?
It's a whole team. I mean, it's the shop. Somebody's sculpting those things, and then we're molding and casting them. You've got, people, sewing and fabricating the gloves, and then, working out how the spikes are going to attach to the gloves. And, you've got hard spikes for close-up hero shots, and you've got soft rubber spikes for stunts, so somebody doesn't get their eye poked out.
Wow. Right. And so you did that for a while, and then what was the next step? When did you decide? Okay, I'm sculpting other people's stuff.
Well, like I said, I was sculpting a lot on my own, just my own personal projects, and I had a couple little freelance things on the side where I was sculpting, and one of my friends that I worked with in film also did toys. And he saw some of my sculpture work, and he kept saying, "You got to do toys. You got to sculpt toys." And I realized after a while there was no way I was going to make the transition from mold maker to sculptor in special effects without leaving the industry and then coming back, because it was just it's a weird thing when you get pigeonholed into one thing. They don't want to move you over to something else. So,
and correct me if I'm wrong, that was around the cusp of the CG kind of turnover of special effects.
Yeah,
was it not?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that was back when I made the jump to toys was in '98.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, that was when CG was really kind of starting to take off and was really starting to become feasible. I mean, Jurassic Park was kind of the first thing back in '93, but didn't really get legs for several more years.
Right, and the industry was, in other words, the industry was changing.
Yeah, the industry was changing, and, I had a good gig going at the time. I was working for Jim Henson's, and I had been there for almost 3 years, but I decided to make the leap and just start doing toys. My friend had met another toy sculptor who was looking for an assistant, and he hooked me up with him, and so I started out doing just little accessory pieces that would come with like a main action figure, and doing that on the side, and then it just took off from there.
Now, what type of toys did you start off with? What type of toys are you sculpting now?
Like I said, I started off just with accessories. Like if a figure came with an axe or with a little sidekick character, moving parts, I would do those. But then pretty soon I started moving to like fully articulated action figures. The first full-on figures that I did were a set of Speed Racer figures.
Wow.
For a company called Resource, which is now long out of business.
Now, did you ever get a chance to do anything in the Star Wars realm or similar realm?
I have, well, not Star Wars, no. I've my early career was video game figures were really popular when I was first getting into toys. So I did a lot of video game characters. I did Sonic the Hedgehog. I did some Street Fighter stuff. I did a little Mario, Turtle Shell. No, Star Wars I have not gotten to do. I've gotten to do some comic book stuff. Did a lot of stuff for DC Comics for a little bit. So I've got to do a Batman, a Superman, a Supergirl, and some of that stuff. So, but unfortunately, I've not been able to crack that Star Wars nut. The closest I've come is working for Hasbro, who does the Star Wars figures now. Oh, actually, you know what? No, I take that back. Probably the closest, again, was for Hasbro. I got to do a couple Indiana Jones figures.
Wow. Well, that's pretty cool.
I did, I think only one of them, I only saw one of them in the store. I did two. I did a German soldier, and I did I forget I think they called him a Punjab warrior or something. He was one of the One of the guys with a turban from the
Temple?
I think from Temple, yeah. Or maybe he was from the first movie. I can't remember. I think he was from Temple.
Cool.
But
that's cool.
He ever came out. I don't know if they ever hit the market. The German Soldier I know came out. But.
And now you're with what company are you with now? I'm sorry.
Fisher Price.
Yeah, and so what's the nature of what you're doing right now? Is it for younger kids or?
Fisher Price is basically newborn to about 8 years old. So.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a much younger style of stuff, which I actually enjoy. I like. I've always liked more cartoony stuff, more fun, exaggerated stuff versus more realistic stuff. So
does your daughter have like every toy?
She has a lot. Yeah. We get a nice discount. So.
Well, that's cool. Cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing that. We're gonna take a break, and when we come back, we're gonna get right into talking about The Godfather. So, for those listening, please stick around. We'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back to Digging Star Wars. You're listening to Chris and Matt. We're going to chat about The Godfather now. We're going to set up the film before we start talking about its connection to Return of the Jedi. You had mentioned, Matt, it's been a while since you've seen it. I think it may have been since film school since I've seen it. I just watched it this past week. It was pretty cool watching it again and almost not remembering where it was going. Did you find that it came back to you real quick as you were watching it?
Some of it did, yeah. But, I completely forgot that there was the whole part with Michael over in Italy, in Sicily. I completely forgot that happened. I thought all the Sicily stuff was in part 2. And
yeah, because 2 just seems like, and 2's great, don't get me wrong. It's long, because it's like 2 movies in one, and I agree. Like, when he's over, in Italy, you're like, well, how long is this going to last,
Yeah, I forgot how long this movie was.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, in gathering research for this episode, I actually just, I Googled The Godfather, and lo and behold, there is a very beautiful official website set up for The Godfather, which is quite simply thegodfather.com.
Oh.
There's no space between The Godfather. And they built it, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, when they were getting together the Coppola restoration, and they were doing the DVDs and the Blu-ray.
I saw that they're doing that restoration with the Blu-ray.
Yeah.
So that should be nice.
Yeah, it looks really good, and but the website's really cool. So for those listening, once you've done this, you want to learn more about it, please check it out. I'm not going to read the complete synopsis that was online because it was rather lengthy, but I'm going to give you just enough to kind of let you know what we're talking about. So again, I'm quoting. This is right off the Godfather website in regards to their synopsis. Popularly viewed as one of the best American films ever made, the multi-generational crime saga The Godfather from 1972 is a touchstone of cinema, one of the most widely imitated, quoted, and lampooned movies of all time. Marlon Brando and Al Pacino star as Vito Corleone and his youngest son Michael, respectively. It is the late 1940s in New York, and Corleone is the parlance of organized crime, a godfather or don, the head of a mafia family. Michael, a freethinker who defied his father by enlisting in the Marines to fight in World War II, has returned a captain and a war hero. Having long ago rejected the family business, Michael shows up at the wedding of his sister Connie, played by Talia Shire, with his non-Italian girlfriend Kay, played by Diane Keaton, who learns for the first time about the family business. And then it goes on to explain, the ins and outs of the long, long story. The Godfather, again, off the synopsis here, The Godfather was nominated for 11 Academy Awards and winning for Best Picture, Best Actor for Marlon Brando, and Best Adapted Screenplay. The Godfather was also followed by a pair of sequels. So 11 Academy Awards. I mean,
that's huge.
That's huge for back in the day. I mean, this is pre-Titanic and Lord of the Rings. This is pretty amazing. One thing, when I was going through this too, is just the star power that's in this movie. You got Pacino, you got Brando, James Caan, and then
Duvall, Diane Keaton.
Diane Keaton and Talia Shire. I mean, it's just amazing the amount of names. And then, and then when you get to the second installment, you add De Niro to the mix. It's mind blowing, and it's I think it's funny because like The Godfather is a lot like Star Wars in that a lot of people who have never seen The Godfather or the original Star Wars movies can get a pop culture of Star Wars or Godfather reference.
Yeah.
If someone starts talking like Marlon Brando from The Godfather, you know what it is. If they play that music, that, kind of violin, whatever music, like, you know what's going on. And like the Star Wars movies, it's misquoted to the end. Yeah. Which really must annoy fans.
Yeah.
And, not jumping right to the comparisons, but like Star Wars, most Godfather fans that I have spoken with think 2 is the best, just like most Star Wars, original Star Wars, think Empire is the best.
Yeah.
And I know I went to a screenwriting seminar in L.A., I don't know, maybe 6 years ago, and all the Pixar guys were there. Andrew Stanton was there, and he said that when they came to Toy Story 2, like one of the rules of Pixar originally was they weren't going to do any sequels.
Right.
So when they decided, well, they're going to do Toy Story 2, what do we do? And they said, we looked at the 2 most successful sequels, the best sequels of all time in our collective opinion, and that was The Godfather 2 and The Empire Strikes Back. And I think that's very telling, like, how important both films are to, multi-generation of filmmakers, but to that effect, like how important The Godfather is, because I think it's just a cliche to most because they don't know the film.
Right. It's so many other films have riffed off it that, it's almost like they feel like they've seen it even though they haven't.
Right. Right. And the funny thing is, like, it's coming out 1972, and there's a lot of gunplay and a lot of violence and whatnot. So it's pretty intense, but like even watching it now, like, yeah, this is intense. It's so mild to what you see in films today, which is certainly a statement on where we're at. But it's nonetheless the effect or the impactfulness of the violence is still there after all these years. Like it's crazy.
In some regards, I feel like it's almost even more impactful because it's just it is so it's I don't know, it's more subdued. So when it's used, it feels really effective.
Yeah, and I think they explore the characters a lot. Mm-hmm. It's not it's not just this guy's a bad guy because of the way he looks. He's a mean looking guy, and boom, there's cold hearted killing, and then there's deep regret for people that are lost in this mafia war.
And it's not this fast-paced killing spree. It's slow, deliberate shots, and there's a build-up to them.
In watching this again, what was your feeling? Did you like, yeah, this is a good movie?
Well, yeah, I thought it was a really good movie. The two biggest things, I guess, that were going through my head were, first of all, I was like, my God, everyone in this is so young, except Brando. But I'm like, you forget how young Pacino was, and especially Diane Keaton. She was like 26 or something. She's
almost barely recognizable.
Yeah, I forgot she was in it, and I'm looking at it like, I think that's Diane Keaton. And I ended up on IMDb, I'm like, oh yeah, it was. But yeah, everybody, James Caan, I mean, I'm used to seeing him like an elf. He looks like an old man. I mean, but he's a handsome guy. That's funny, But that was my one thought, and then my other thought was, okay, now I gotta watch 2.
No, I thought the same thing. Welcome back to Digging Star Wars The Godfather. I'm here with Matt Flesher, and we're talking about its connections to Return of the Jedi. So as I mentioned earlier, that August 1998, you ran out and got Star Wars Trivial Pursuit. I'm going to read you the question as appears in the card. And by the way, I don't know if you knew this or not, but it looks like these cards are numbered. Like, I guess they have some way of categorizing it. So If you want to be really geeky, this is Trivial Pursuit card number 205.
I can run and grab it.
Yeah, so go look at it. But the question reads at the bottom of the card, and let's see if you can get this, Matt.
Okay.
What character in the trilogy, now keep in mind this is the original trilogy since this came out before the prequels, so what character in the trilogy did George Lucas compare to Marlon Brando's portrayal of Don Corleone in The Godfather?
I would say Lando.
Oh, come on.
No?
I just answered. Okay, I'll read the question again. Keep in mind we're talking about Return of the Jedi.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, that would be my first instinct was
I can understand that, I guess.
Java, but...
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so, yeah, Jabba the Hutt, right?
Yes.
All right. And the funny thing is, I don't know what you said you had the box set. Is it Blu-ray or is it DVD? Or is
Just
it
DVD, yeah.
Okay. So I have the VHS box set, which you can imagine has the larger spine, and has this great picture of Brando holding the cat. And the funny thing about it is Brando's face with the cotton ball mouth and kind of turned down in his eyes, those eyebrows with the squinty eyes. It's like he looks like Jabba. Like if you look at it, like it totally looks like they modeled the face of Jabba the Hutt after him. But it's obviously really more so the fact that Don Corleone is this master crime lord, and he has the politicians and everything else in his pocket, and he's pulling all the strings. He's not afraid to start a war with any mob or whatever. And that really is like Jabba. Like when you get to Jabba's palace and you meet Jabba, not only is his big, fat, bloated size oppressive and scary and whatnot, which is definitely a good thing to model after Don Corleone, but just the fact that, like, especially as the expanded universe comics and novels build up the backstory of Jabba, and Jabba's really powerful. He's got connections everywhere. He is Don Corleone of Star Wars. He is that. So, and that really is the biggest connection that is there. But to add to that, I think the funny thing is when you're watching The Godfather, of course, throughout the film, there's a lot of Italian spoken, where it just goes from English to Italian, and then subtitles come up.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're watching Jedi, the first time subtitles come up is when you're in Jabba's palace, and they're speaking. Well, first it's with Bib Fortuna, I think, and then later when they get in front of Jabba, they're speaking Huttese.
Right.
You got the whole business with 3PO there, translating, because once he's given as a gift. But in The Godfather, the first time that Italian comes up and there's subtitles is when Don Corleone sends one of his own personal bodyguard / henchmen, and he sends them to another mob, and he says, I want you to get into this family, I want you to see what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
I want you to basically work undercover,
right?
So he goes there, and ultimately it's the scene where this guy goes in and they're talking, and he winds up getting stabbed and choked,
right?
The henchman at the beginning, but they're talking, the conversation is just them, like him trying to get in and make a deal, and as they're going through stuff and talking about it, they mention a dollar amount for bringing a man in. They're like, well, I can get you this guy. And they're like, how much do you want for this guy? And, all this is in Italian with subtitles. And the guy says 50,000, and that's like a big shock. 50,000. And of course, I'm like, oh my God, Bruce is there with Chewie, and they're talking, and it's 50,000. And so, I mean, again, it could be just a coincidence, but I thought, if this is a coincidence, this is a really big coincidence.
Well, yeah. Well, if only Luca Brasi had a thermal detonator. But actually, the thing I found, I did find a little tidbit that said that Lucas was inspired by that scene when he had Leia choke Jabba. That
really?
Luca Brasi getting strangled there was kind of the inspiration for her choking out Jabba.
Oh, that's I didn't find it, but you know what the funny thing is,
and that was why I answered the question the other way, because I was thinking, well, because my first instinct when I watched it was, the Brando's Jabba,
right?
Jabba's Brando, whatever. He's the Godfather, right. But then I was thinking, well, he was for the actual look of Jabba, it sounds like he was more inspired by Luca Brasi. And when you look back at him, he's just this big mountain blubbery with a blubber face.
Yeah, oh, totally. Well, that's the funny thing too is
the bulging eyes.
And obviously, we're lacing this section with spoilers, but But like even Brando's death, like when he's playing around with his grandson and he's got the lime in his mouth,
Yeah.
and then he starts to choke and you know, he's gasping for air and he falls and whatever that's corn stalks or whatever it is in their backyard. It's a silly choking death. Like it's not the death that you would expect. Like the Godfather, like he avoids getting shot in the hospital and all these other crazy things, and then he puts a piece of fruit in his mouth and he dies. It's silly. It's just silly and bizarre.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how Jobs' death is. Like I remember watching it as a kid and like totally digging it because you got Carrie Fisher up there in that bikini outfit and she's, you know, putting Job out and the whole bit, and you're like, wow, this is great. But like when you really sit back and look at it, it's like, this is really silly. Like how Job is going to die. It's almost sillier than Fett's death.
Yeah.
That
this
was
little 105-pound girl can choke out this giant slug.
You know, that's interesting that like Lucas found that inspiration too, because one of the other things that I found, and if you look up in the Wikipedia entry for The Godfather is 18 pages long. It gets ridiculous how much information they have. But one of the tidbits they had in there was how Lucas actually was the inspiration for Coppola to direct The Godfather. Coppola, as it turns out, prior to it, was in debt to Paramount for some ridiculous for back then amount of money, like $400,000. I know in film terms now it seems like nothing, but back then it was a lot. And so he was in debt, and the reason he was in debt was because of George Lucas's first feature, THX 1138. So he had, you know, Coppola fought for Lucas and blah, 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 and the studio didn't turn out the way they wanted, and obviously the box office was dismal, and it didn't make the money, and Coppola was in a tight spot. And I don't know if he was offered the chance to direct The Godfather, or it was just like being talked about or whatever. You know, Coppola and Lucas are good friends, and they're chatting about this, and Lucas pretty much told him, like, just direct the movie. Like, you owe them the money. It's not going to hurt you.
I do remember. I remember hearing that story. I don't know if I read it in Skywalking or where. That must be where I heard it. Skywalking.
It's like a lot of early George Lucas business transactions. It becomes Hollywood money. Right. So, you know, Lucas said to him, like, you might as well just do it and get this debt off your back and whatever. So, begrudgingly, Coppola went and directed this movie, and it changed cinema. Like, you know, it was bigger than anything they could possibly have imagined. I think it's funny, and I think it's very interesting, and I think it's also very interesting in light of what Lucas was about to do to the industry as well. What a crazy time to be in Hollywood.
Oh my God, yeah.
In that decade when, you know, even when it was happening, I don't think they realized what was happening.
Yeah.
You know, between, you know, The Godfather and then Spielberg with Jaws and Close Encounters and then Star Wars, like, it was just amazing what was about to being unleashed onto the world pop culture-wise. And I think it's very interesting that it all ties back to the friendship between George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I love reading that book, Skywalking. I mean, I know that's not what we're talking about, but it's just because it captures that time and the excitement of it, and you get a sense that they maybe kind of knew they were doing something big, but they had no idea how big, you know?
Right.
Yeah, it's only in hindsight you can look back and see just how monumental a time that was.
Yeah, and it's just a bunch of guys who like to make movies.
Yeah.
You know, like, I mean, I don't want to belittle it, but
that's what it is. Yeah.
They just loved movies, and they were very good at what they do, and the timing was right. And when, you know, I mean, The Godfather's a dark movie. And for it to be as successful as it was in you know, the early 70s with everything that was going on in the early 70s, it wasn't exactly a bright, shining, happy time.
Yeah. Now, do you know if the book did well? Because I don't know. I assume in order to have a movie made of it, the book must have been a bestseller, or at least a...
Yeah, the book was a bestseller, and I think it was a hot property to get. And so the fact that, like, Coppola was thrown around, you know, I think that's the beautiful irony of that story. I think many a filmmaker would have been like, yes, I've scored this, you know,
right.
this great movie, and that wasn't the case. He was reluctant because, again, you know, and I know people roll their eyes when you hear this, but, like, they want to make the movies they want to make.
Right.
I know people are like, you gotta be kidding me, they're so lucky to make any type of movie, but there's a reason why the direct-to-video market is so massive and huge, because there's a lot of directors that jump at the first chance to do something instead of standing back, looking at the project and picking something that they really want to put their heart and soul into.
Yeah. Well, and especially Coppola, who was, defines auteur,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it just makes a great story. The fact that, here he was indebted to the studio because he helped Lucas, and Lucas is the one offering the advice that just do it.
Yeah.
It's not going to hurt you. Move on. and it's like, when you mentioned Coppola, maybe Apocalypse Now might come to mind before The Godfather, but more often than not, I think of The Godfather first.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's so huge and has changed cinema. When you read a lot of films, they always say they're one of the best American films ever made. But in this particular case, it has some sticking power because of its significance in pop culture and what it's done to influence generations of filmmakers and whatnot.
Yeah.
If you could just talk about the ending of Godfather 1 and what other comparison you found to Jedi.
The end of Godfather has a montage that cuts back and forth between the baptism of Michael's godson and all of his men gearing up to execute and carry out the executions of all the other family leaders. Right. And, it keeps cross-cutting between those two events, building up to the climax of everybody getting killed and then the baptism. And it just reminded me of the end of Jedi, where it cross-cuts between the battle on Endor, the battle between Luke and Vader, and the assault on the new Death Star. And I don't know if that was deliberate on Lucas's part or deliberate tribute, but it was a part of Jedi that I've always been one of my favorite things about Jedi, was that the way that cross-cutting builds up to a climax, and so it jumped out at me in Godfather as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really good catch on your part, because the thing about it is, people look at those three scenes in Jedi and they're just like, oh, they're three battles. It's just twice as much excitement as there being two battles, whatever. But the thing about what's going on with the Emperor and Vader and Luke is that it is very ceremonial to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of talk, and there's a lot of pauses between a line that's thrown out, and of course you're going to have the lightsaber battle and everything else. And I mean, not to get too heady about Star Wars, but Vader is reborn at that moment.
Yeah.
Like, he comes back as Anakin, and when you're cutting out of that particularly to Endor, Endor's a land battle. It's just all gunplay, and I think it's a good catch, and I think that's a nice thought. And I agree. Like, I have a lot of favorite parts of Jedi. I said it many a time throughout digging Star Wars. Return of the Jedi is my favorite. I get a lot of grief for saying that, but it is. And I'm not saying, Empire's the best, and I'll never argue that, but Jedi's my favorite. And that is a great part of Jedi. The ending of Jedi with those three battles and cutting is just so exciting and very well done. And just the editing alone is great.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it work so well. And that's what makes the end of Godfather 1 work well.
Yeah.
If you think about those scenes separate, the montage of gearing up and executions is what it is, and it's mildly exciting, but really it's like the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
And the baptism scene, in a complete scene uncut, meaningful, yes, but I don't think as compelling. What's compelling is the fact that in your mind, he's involved in this sacred, respected act of the baptism, right, and he's literally pulling the strings.
And they're literally asking him, do you forgo sin? Do you forgo?
Yeah, right.
I was like, yes, I do.
And the funny thing too about the ending of Godfather 1, this does not have a Star Wars, connection, but I was talking to another buddy of mine at work who I know would appreciate The Godfather. He's a fan of that, And he said that he had read somewhere that throughout the entire movie, the first movie, Godfather 1, the camera doesn't move. There are static shots. There's no dollies, no pans, nothing, except for the last shot where the door closes on Diane Keaton, on the character Kay. And Coppola was very specific about that because he wanted the action unfold much like a historical photograph, where the composition kind of came up into what people had in their mind when they saw old pictures from the newspapers and whatever of that era.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And then when you think about it, most of those scenes when they end, particularly the execution scenes, it's a very well composed frame.
Yeah.
Between the tail fins of the car off in the lower, lower third left corner, and then the steps. And that's the funny thing is when you go to the Godfather website, it's a beautiful website, and they have all these stills and video backgrounds, right, that are kind of ghosted and sienna toned, but they're all bodies laying all over the place. Oh, it's beautiful. There's all these corpses. It's just a really weird thing that they've done. But it's true. Like, there's definitely respect for the frame throughout all of Godfather 1 and Godfather 2. I mean, my memory's kind of fuzzy on the film. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember really being impressed with how it was shot.
Right. Yeah.
And there's something to be said about that because it could easily turn cliche, but it didn't. It felt new and old at the same time. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry. I was just going to say there was one other connection I was going to bring up real quick. Was just the fact that the beginning of Godfather, or the first half of Godfather almost is Michael, or at least the first hour, forgoing the family business and trying to he doesn't want to become his father,
Right.
He doesn't want to do that. And, you've got Luke, fighting his dark tendencies. He doesn't want to become his father.
That's interesting.
He's fighting to stay good. And obviously they go in different directions. But, I thought that was, another interesting.
That's great because, it's something I didn't think about because, do you remember the documentary from Star Wars: The Jedi that ran on PBS?
Yeah.
It was narrated by Mark Hamill. And there's a part of that documentary when they're discussing Jedi, and after Luke cuts off Vader's hand in Jedi, and then looks at his own mechanical hand, and then there's a close-up on the burnt wires of Vader's hand. Mm-hmm. The narration in the documentary was something like, the father has become son, and all that. And it's true, like that. Of course, when I was 12, seeing, I was like, oh, it's so deep. It's so intense. It's true. Like, Luke is pretty much being, throughout the trilogy, he's set up for success or failure. It's all up to him. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, he wins by getting angry. He wins by basically being like his dad.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good catch. That's really good. I set out the last episode. Our last episode was Test Pilot, and compared to Empire Strikes Back. And literally, the night that I had finished editing it, finished recording it, typed up the web pages, got the photos, do all the work that you do for a blog, and post this, within hours, the announcement came out that Lucas had sold Lucasfilm to Disney, and it all just got kind of pushed aside. So now that we've fully talked about episode 6, what are your initial thoughts about episode 7 happening?
Well, I mean, my initial thought is I'm psyched. I love it, and part of the reason I love it is just that Lucas is minimally involved with it. I mean, I know he's still an advisor and whatever, but a lot of people I know were like, "Oh my God, Disney! Everyone's gonna have mouse ears, or it's gonna be a musical." It's like, come on. Disney's not stupid. They're not one of the biggest companies because they're idiots,
Right.
They're not going to put princess dresses, on everybody. But, I was excited that Disney bought them. I think they're a great company to be in charge of the property. And look what they've done with the Marvel stuff. I mean, the Marvel stuff's taken off, and they've done a great job with it. With the Iron Man and all that.
Oh, I mean,
they're not wearing dresses. They're not performing musicals.
Right.
So I'm really psyched. The prospect. I mean, it could be anything. It's I think like everyone, every day I see some little tidbit of people are just starving for information now, and they want any little bit of scrap of info they can get. There's all kinds of speculation about who's going to direct it, who's going to write it.
Right. I think my initial reaction was I was nervous, and it wasn't so much I think that they were going to wreck it. It was just it was overwhelming. It was the idea that that more films were going to be made, and to your point, his involvement would be minimal, and it just was really hard to process for me. Everyone that sent me a message on Facebook, I just kept writing back processing because I couldn't get my brain around it. And the funny thing was, you gotta admire Lucas's ability to lie. Like the guy constantly lies to us, and we constantly forgive him for lying because, in that documentary from Star Wars: The Jedi, back in the 80s, he commented how there's 9 chapters. See, there's 9 chapters, and what you have here is the middle 3. You have episodes 4 through 6, and there's supposed to be 9. Well, then you get to the prequels in 1999, and by Attack of the Clones, he's coming out and saying, no, there was never supposed to be 9, there's supposed to be 6. and I'm there, and I'm like, I have you on videotape saying there's 9. Like, no, that's not the case. It's always about Darth Vader. It was always about Darth Vader. It should never be anything else. It should just be the 6. So then this happened, and not only does this happen that they sell, but they mentioned the episode 7 thing. And they'd say, we're going to make 7, 8, 9. And, instantly people are like, well, what do you think? And what can I think? I know as much as anyone else does. But once the dust settled and the jokes were made, I'm thinking, this is pretty cool. We're gonna get 7, 8, 9. We're gonna get it with young, enthusiastic filmmakers who definitely have a respect for the lore. Kathleen Kennedy is great that she's involved, and I know they announced Michael Arndt. I'm hoping I pronounce his name correctly. Is the screenwriter, and he's got an impressive resume between Toy Story 3 and being superb, and okay, this guy gets it. Yeah, I mean, I am excited, and I'm curious. The director will be interesting, and it's a lot of pressure on people who are going to sign up for this, but at the same time, you can't fault them. I know a neighbor of mine, we're giving out, treats on Halloween. He said, what's your initial thoughts? Well, Lucas always said he was afraid Star Wars would turn into Star Trek, where there'd just be another movie coming out. Like, well, guess what? It's just turned into Star Trek.
Yeah.
and that could mean potential reboots and all kinds of things like that. But I'd like to think of it more as James Bond. Like now we have the potential for you to recast and explore, and you'll have crappy movies and you'll have great movies, and you'll have cheesy movies and you'll have really serious movies. And for a franchise, that's great. Because if it can live as long as Bond has lived, then fantastic. But I'm definitely excited. There's a lot of nitpicky things I'm concerned about. Like, so is 20th Century Fox gone? Is John Williams' score going to be treated with respect? You got Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, and Mark Hamill all saying they're willing to do it, but in what way?
I can't imagine they're going to star in it, that it's going to be,
I mean, I really hope that we see an old Luke Skywalker, much old Ben.
Yeah.
And it's taken care of within the first episode and treated with respect, but also kind of symbolically putting the previous films to bed and moving forward. And
it would be nice. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing Luke as a primary character, but Han and Leia, I think their story's kind of done. I mean, and Leia, maybe she's going to be exploring her Jedi abilities, but I'd rather see like something with Luke, trying to rebuild the Jedis and starting a new school, or
or dealing with Han and Leia's kid, like, you know what I mean? Like training. You know.
I mean, way back in the day, I always thought that the Timothy Zahn novels would just be an awesome third trilogy. I thought they were so good, but now, you know, they're all clearly too old to do that. But
yeah, no, I think there's a lot there. There's a lot of potential.
I got to tell you my other two initial reactions that immediately went through my head when I saw the Disney buying Lucasfilm. My first one was that maybe now we'll finally get the theatrical versions on Blu-ray.
No, you know what? I'm glad you said that because you know the funny thing was I could automatically see when this happened. I automatically saw the television commercial with the Disney Vault.
Yeah,
that vault door opening up. Like, for a limited time, the theatrical, you know, release, the way you remember them. I really, really think they're going to do that, and I really think they're going to do it very close to the release date of Episode 7.
Yeah.
You know, I think
I hope so. Yeah. I've been dying for the longest time, and
they were relatively good about putting them out on DVD in that special edition set.
They weren't.
But you know what? Better that than nothing.
Better that than nothing. But that's got the crappy 2.0 sound. It's the audio. That was a slap in the face.
Well,
that was a transfer of the laser disc.
Yeah, right. No, I think you're right. I really do think they're going to do that. I think you're going to hear a lot of exhausted sighs from people that have bought every version that have come down the pike, but quite frankly, this is what everyone's been belly aching for a long, long time, and I think it's going to happen.
I held out on the Blu-ray set. I refused to buy it.
I don't blame you. I don't. You know, and it's funny because you know, when this deal happened, and you know all these types of conversations were happening. I was talking to a really good friend of mine, who's a big Star Wars fan, and I was saying like, yeah, you know, maybe we'll get the theatrical release, maybe we'll get this, we'll get more movies, and this guy who like lives and breathes Star Wars probably more than I do, he leans into me and says, you know, there's such a thing as too much Star Wars, and I was like, you've based your whole life on this movie, like how can you be saying it? But to his point, I think he was concerned with just the overflux of it, and timing's everything. Like when Lucas, like that announcement came out just after Hurricane Sandy passed through the East Coast, you know. Yeah. So like, a lot of people that I know were dealing with loss of property, and they didn't have power for days on end, and everything else. And then, you know, this announcement comes out, and I think the timing of it was also sort of meant to. First of all, it wasn't really acknowledging just, you know, my portion of the country, our portion of the country in the East Coast. But it was also trying to bring some levity and lightness to what was really a heavy news week. Mm-hmm. But the reaction on Twitter was very interesting to follow because you had a lot of fans geeking out and on Facebook too. But then there's a lot of people that were like, why do we care about this when there's people without power or just got their homes washed away? And it was just a really weird scene. And it was a really weird scene to be me in because, you know what I mean? Like I got, like my phone just lit up with text messages and emails and everything else. And it was just kind of funny to kind of like, because we were all home from work, you know what I mean? Like you know, like you just were because trees were down, power was out, et cetera. And you're like, wow, this is crazy. Like it's amazing how big a news story it was. And I know it's $4 billion or whatever, but it's like it's just amazing. What was your other reaction? Because I know you said was it the theatrical thing, or did you have something else?
Yeah, my other reaction was 3 words or 4 words: Star Wars theme park.
Wow, could go beyond Star Tours.
I would hope so. I mean, it would be awesome to do at least, if not an entire theme park, at least an entire like land. You know, like they did with Harry Potter at Universal. You know, have a whole immersive Star Wars world that you get to walk around and, you know, build the full-scale Millennium Falcon that you get to go, that's a cafe you get to go eat in.
Yeah.
You know, or
that would be awesome. I think
the whole thing, you know, you get to walk around the levels of the Death Star. You know, I mean, how cool would that be?
Yeah. I didn't even think about that, but you're right. I mean, there's that's the thing with Disney. There's so much potential.
Yeah, they're huge.
It's a whole new bag. So, But it's very exciting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I hope, because I think a lot of people, I know I am just kind of indifferent to the prequels, and it's kind of like, they're there, they exist. I'm not crazy about them. I don't feel compelled to go back and watch them really.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to feel that way. I had the same excitement for the prequels, and I have this excitement now, and I'm hoping it's a different experience. I'm hoping this is something that really is something I want to go back to and really kind of carries on the legacy that I think a lot of people hoped the prequels would.
Well, that's the thing, is that there was a lot of people posting on Facebook like, why aren't more people excited about this? And I was like, because we all went through that with the prequels.
Yeah.
I've gone through many different perspectives and feelings and emotions about the prequels, where I defended them for the longest time, and then I accepted that they weren't as good as the original trilogy, and then I've been up and down and sideways with those films. I've gone through the mud for those films. Mm-hmm. That's why when this announcement came out about 7, I was on the fence about it. And everyone was quick to point out Lucas isn't writing and directing them. That's a good thing. And yeah, I get it, but it was tough. It was just tough to just throw yourself wholeheartedly back into that wonderful optimism of there being new Star Wars movies, because we kind of were burned. What I will say is what the ultimate saving grace that day, then and there, as it's all going down, is when I shared that news with my sons, they lit up like Christmas trees. And my 9-year-old son, Peter, he said, so when's it coming out? I said, well, I think they're talking 2015. And so he's just doing, he's going through all the math. And I realized, like, he'll be seeing episode 7 at the same age I went and saw episode 6. And 6 is what turned my world around.
Yeah.
Like, that's really when I decided I want to get in TV and film, and I want to do this stuff, and it put me on a path. So it's very exciting as a dad.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, because for the longest time, I feel like I've been really jaded about Star Wars, and it's just in the last couple of years that I've really started to kind of feel like it's okay to be a Star Wars fan still, and enjoy, and kind of let my inner nerd out again, and then especially just in the last 2 years since I've had my daughter, I feel like, I'm excited to show her Star Wars. I'm excited, and she's already got her stuffed Yoda. She can say Yoda. She can say Wookiee. she can't say R2-D2. She says D2. I was watching Jedi, and she Boba Fett. So she's already recognizing the characters and stuff, and I'm excited for, to share that with her. So I want this to be good, and I'm happy to be able to be excited about it.
Yeah, and that's really what it's about, and it's cool that we're getting to have that experience with our kids, and it is exciting. So let's just keep our fingers crossed and try not to read too much in advance, because that's the worst.
Yeah.
Like, I love getting the information, but I hate getting the information.
I know.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I want to thank you, Matt, very, very much, because it takes time to do these things. It takes time to sit and watch the film, especially when you've got work and kids and the whole bit. So thank you so much for making time to do this, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, I had a great time. It was great catching up with you and talking with you, and I had a great time.
Yeah, and, we'll just have to, see what happens with episode 7, and I want to thank my listeners again. This is going to be our final episode for this season, for season 3. Please check back to the website, look at some episodes that you may have missed, and keep checking back for updates, because I'm going to try to throw them up there as we get closer to episode 7. So thank you for listening. Matt, thanks again. Have a good one.
You too.
Digging Star Wars is produced by Mich Media and has no connection to Lucasfilm Limited whatsoever. Copyrights for films, trademark characters, and related materials discussed in Digging Star Wars remain with their respective owners. For a list of references or source material, please send an email to diggingstarwars@gmail.com.